Now that we have our DynamoDB table updated with the index and a global secondary index for shardcode, we should be able to actually take in a URL path using path parameter and extract the shardcode and then search our DynamoDB table for a matching URL. And that's how we'll look up the original URL and perform a redirect. So let's start writing our code for the redirect. So let's open up under that py, and again, let's rename this since we actually changed the handler file name. And let's go to the template.yaml and let's find a redirect, resource name redirect, and redirect.handler, source redirect, so everything looks good. But we do need to add the events for the API, and since we're doing this manually now, the process is pretty much quite the same, but we need to actually type that in. So let's start right after architecture and before environments. We're going to add events, and the type of event, we need just a logical name, so let's call this shortener, and this will be a get redirect, and of type HTTP API, and let's add some properties. First thing is the path, and for this the path will be anything from a root path, and we need a path parameter, so we're going to call this shardcode, and this is the value we'll extract from our URL. And the method, this is a get, and we need the API ID, and we're going to do a reference of API. So let's just copy this. Just make sure we have logs. So we have our event, and if we save this and look up our application composer, we should see the third function, redirect, being connected. So let's go back over to our code and let's actually write out the functionality now. So let's open up redirect. The py, there's a few things that we'll need, right? We do still need access to the DynamoDB. So let's actually import a few things. We're going to import photo tree. We need OS. So we have 3 things we need. That should be good, but we'll actually revisit this later. And let's do our table name. And we'll get this from environ get, and let's just copy the name. And for DynamoDB resource equal photo.resource, and this will be a DynamoDB resource. And let's create a table again, DynamoDB.table, and let's pass in the table name. So those are some of the things that we need just to get going. Let's start wrapping some try-catch, and I'll like to remove that, so let's just have a try. And one of the first things we need to do is get the shardcode, and we're going to get this from the event. Again, it's a path parameter, and with name shardcode. Once we have the shardcode, we can perform a lookup or a query. in DynamoDB. So let's just pass it in. We need an index name, and this will be unique key index, and this should match the value of what we passed in when we updated our table, right? So if we open this table, we're showing a table, and if we look, we have a unique key index, and that's the string we're passing in, right? And we need a key condition expression. And we can explain what this is, and this will be a key lookup. Now we're just gonna hard code some of these things, but later on we can extract these into variables just to make this code a little more cleaner. And this is equals hard code variable that we have here. So key should be a property of Boto, so let's get that directly. So from Boto tree DynamoDB conditions, let's import the key. So that should fix that one problem. And let's print the response. So if when we're doing some debugging, we can actually see. So we're just going to do a f string, and we're going to print response. Now, this should return, a response should have one matching record, right? Since these are all unique. But let's treat this, let's just look for an array just in case. So we're going to say items response.get, and we're going to get the items. And let's print items as well. And when we say item, this should be the actual JSON of the record, right? That will get in. So it's similar to what we did for get. So now we need to extract the original URL, and that's how we'll redirect our users. So let's do the original URL equal to item.get, and let's pass in the name of that value. And let's just define our item. And now that we have our item, we're just gonna have a if condition before we start extracting. So let's just say if items at index, and this should get the first dictionary of the list. And here we can get individual key. So we need original URL, and this will be item URL, and this is what we need to redirect our users. So we're grabbing the shardcode, we're looking up the database value for matching record. Once we find that matching record, we're extracting the original URL, and now we can redirect our users. In the year, let's say these values you were maybe setting flags to see if these URL are active or not. We could do additional check, right? We could say if status equal active, then maybe not redirect, or if the count of so many clicks as a certain value, and whatever condition you want to add. We're going to keep this simple. We're just going to get the URL redirect users, and we also need to increment the clicks so we can keep some analytics on how much people are visiting those URL. All right, so here, let's increment number of clicks each time a URL is visited. Alright, so let's actually do that. So we're going to do a table that update item, and let's set the primary key. Let's just add an expression for update. Let's go ahead and try to get our redirect to work, and we'll add the increment after just to keep this a little more simple. So let's return if this is successful. Let's return a status code of 302, and that's a redirect. Let's add the headers and location, and this is where we want to send the user. Item original URL. And we did get this already, so we can pretty much just pass that in. And let's close out our exception. And we can just do a general exception here. As E and print our exception, so we can log. We'll later on change these prints to using default logger, but this still gives us enough information. So let's return a status code 404 body, and we say URL or no matching URL, and that should be enough to test this. Let's go ahead and save. And let's do a sound build. And that was quick. Let's go ahead and grab one of these URLs. And we're just going to grab this. And let's open up your browser. And I'm just going to open up a tab, and I'm just going to put that in. And I'm getting not found. So maybe this one got deleted. So make sure we're using, so let's do a get. This is the original code. And again, best way to probably do this is to export table items. We only have one, so we're going to click that. We're going to grab this URL. Let's give it a try. And the site can't be reached, so let's actually go ahead and create one with a URL that we know works. So let me open up this URL and make sure it's valid. Okay, so it's a valid URL. So let's create a new one, and let's grab this, and let's see if we need to do some debugging. But let's try that again. And we're getting not found, so obviously we are breaking something. So let's go ahead and open up CloudFormation, and let's look for a redirect resource, and let's see if we have any log going out. So let's just make sure dev slash pad slash. So let's go to monitor, and let's see what's happening. So we're not actually hitting the API, so let's Go back to CloudFormation, and we are going to open up our API. And if we go to routes, let's make sure we have, and we have a route for shortcode. That should be good. We have an integration Lambda function. So let's take a look at our code again. It looks pretty okay if you ask me. We have shortcode, and let's see, which is anything after the host API. Response, table at query. Actually, let's do this from VS Code, a lot more easier to read. So we have a redirect, we have our table name. So let's look up our redirect. Our path looks fine. Add shortcode. So let's take. So if we look, after looking at our code, right, the code itself is fine. But if you look at our API endpoints of all we create and all we get, we add to pass in the stage prior to the URL. And we'll need to do the same for this. However, we aren't storing these URL with this stage. Now, this is how it will work once we have our own domain. You won't need to see short URL slash dev or slash prod slash URL, right? It will look exactly like this. However, this won't work yet because we weren't accounting for this. So if we put this in, this should fail. And once we add our stage, this works, right? So our code works. We just need to account for both possibilities. One is when you're working in your dev environment, there will be a stage variable. And once we move into production, we'll remove that stage variable and the URL will even be much shorter. So let's update that in our next video and clean up our functionality for redirect so that it works for both cases.